talking about the other side of the equation, housing, how does the transformation of people's desired transit use change the way we think about where housing should go?
This is a good part of the larger frame because, as we know, before the recession, so many different metro areas based their economy on real estate and on housing construction. And so the construction industry still took a big hit during the recession. We still haven't recovered a lot of those jobs. So there's some forces that are trying to make sure that that we can kind of restart that whole industry by building more housing. But I think that if that housing conversation is framed around accessibility, right, then it'll change the way that we think about it, and it won't just be housing far out in the suburban fringe. It'll be housing that's closer in. We have a lot of rehab that we need to do. You can still put people to work in the construction industry doing things like rehab as opposed to just building new out in the suburban fringe. But places were bruised pretty hard. I think they still recognize the challenges that came with that, and let's hope that continues. But it's not clear right now.
Yeah. Okay, so the last two questions actually tied into what I was going to close with, which is the funding part of the equation. So you've said we should go to the voters. How realistic is it that the state of Connecticut can come up with state funding for advancing improvements to our transportation system, maintaining what we have? And are there other innovative ways of financing projects like loan funds, and you mentioned congestion pricing, that we should be thinking about in addition to just tax dollars?
Well, the tax dollars matter. I mean, the gas tax hasn't been raised in a while. I have the stats here. A bunch of states are starting to do that now, and the federal government hasn't done it in 25 years. 8 states did it last year. 2 more states have already done it this year, and states that are as different as Maryland and Wyoming have raised their own gasoline taxes. So it's starting to happen. States are starting to recognize that. State legislatures are starting to recognize their need to invest. Michigan is a great example of where they were running the state that was really battered by the recession was starting to run a budget surplus, and it was fairly completed. They were going to take that surplus and return it to the citizens. And as the legislative calendar kind of ticked on, and as the winter got really, really bad in Michigan, they knew that, now we've got to reinvest in the transportation system. So they took that money they were going to give back to the voters and invest it in the transport system. So they didn't raise taxes. They just made better budgetary decisions. So all that I think still matters. The referendum and going to the voters is challenging because they usually don't pass in the first time. At places like Denver and Kansas City, Dallas, you have to go back to the voters over and over again to refine the ask and to make sure that you're asking for the right thing. And the troubling trend is in the other way in places like in Virginia and in Atlanta, where they spend a lot of political capital to get something on the ballot. They fail, and they say, well, we did that, let's try to do something else. You have to keep going back. You have to get the message better. You have to find out what the voters really want. And it's a great way to crowdsource some of these investment decisions, because they will make the right decisions, I think, 9 times out of 10. But it takes some time. You have to have you have to have a name in the legislation. You have to have an infrastructure of people who can go to the voters and can kind of talk about these things and can work on these campaigns. But the track record is clear. When these things, when they go to the voters and when they're the appropriate kind of investments, they do pass pretty regularly.